Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Does it work? Yes. This is the outline of my presentation, and as Yang said, I'll be focusing on China. And I've been involved since 2006 in this effort to promote sustainable palm oil in China. But I'd like to mention that the views I'm putting across here does not reflect those of the organizations I've been involved with. They're strictly my personal views, and we will take it as that. I start also with the new RSPO Vision, which is to transform the market and making CSPO the market norm. That means the present production is about over 5 million tons, accounting for about just over 10% of the present total production. And so RSPO itself has a long way to go in transforming its market. And if you look at the present consumption patterns, then the three key markets, of course, is EU, China, and India. But for us to achieve RSPO's vision, it means that that's going to aim for about 100% CSPO globally. But looking at the commitments from the European market up to 2015 and so on, to me, I think the total share of the European market will be about 15%. So, if you're going to transform the market, then you really have to depend on the developing economies, particularly China, India, and also Indonesia, because there you can see that it's projected an exponential increase in demands from these countries in consumption. Now, last RT8, you saw this slide which was presented by Johan on a very ambitious projection of what is required for market transformation. What are the tipping points? And in this scenario, I think he put a lot of emphasis on the contribution from the emerging economies. For China alone, projected demand for CSPO in the total consumption of China is by 2019, 40%. This is a huge, huge figure here. And, but a few questions I'm raising is that, are these projections realistic, number one? And if they are, is China aware of these expectations of them to contribute towards this market transformation? And even if they are aware, why should they bother? I think that's a critical question for them. And if you're going to promote and transform the market, I think the safest way is to really have a convincing business case. So do we have a business case for promoting CSPO in China? Yang mentioned about the study that we did on CFNA DEFRA, a study on a policy study. We tried to establish a business case. It was tough, I can show you that. And the result was there was no convincing case as yet. And we see that the business case will operate at two levels. One is a national business case for supporting CSPO, and the other one is at the business level, where you talk about associations and individual companies and corporations having that business case. We tried to establish a business case also in RT8 when CFNA had a stakeholder consultation and addresses many issues, but we could not get specifics on the business case for China. There were generic points for supporting the business case, and definitely for drivers of CSPO in China, it was definitely concluded that it will not be the consumer, the individual consumer. And again, March this year, I facilitated again another stakeholder consultation, this time in Beijing for CFNA, and we had the major market players, MNCs and Chinese companies, trying to see, among other things, do we have a business case for promoting sustainable palm oil in China? I had more questions than answers in this session. So you can see that there's a huge task ahead of RSPO and also Oxfam if we're going to promote the CSPO in China. Now, one of the complications is that in China is in the trade flows. China is the second biggest importer of palm oil. It's all coming mainly from Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. But it's an inward flow. All of this is going in for domestic consumption. Very little at this stage is going out as exported products. And that's a big task, because you really have the absence of the supply chain pressure. If it had been a case like paper and paper products, whereby you have an active flow of import of exports of the raw material and import and export of the manufactured materials. Then you have a better chance. But at this moment, the present flow is just inward, and the Chinese companies may not really have to worry about using CSPO because there's no demand for it now. Now, I mentioned that the business case will be at two levels. Based on the study that we did, at the company level, it's very weak. You need to have generate a lot of data to support the business case. But at the national level, I think Jonathan Porritt expressed some optimism about the commitment by the Chinese government. And it's very clear. The Chinese government has been sending the right messages at the global, national and global level. And the overall strategy for the country is that to have a harmonious society that's focused, among other things, sustainable development. It started this pursuit of a low-carbon economy, trying to build a green supply chain. And even in Copenhagen, has made very clear commitment of a 40 to 45% reduction in its carbon intensity by 2020. Now, this year is the start of the first year of the 12th five-year plan for China. And among the 7 pillars for this plan is this one on effectively conserving resources, protecting the environment, and responding to climate change. But the challenge for RSPO is how can we get and convince Chinese government to put palm oil and CSPO into the national agenda. Now, to develop a strategy for engagement with China, I've got a number of factors which I think we should consider. One is that we must remember is a two-pronged approach. China is often seen as being the second biggest consumer, but potentially could be a very, very big upstream producer of palm oil through investments in countries of Africa. And I mentioned earlier, critical to establish a business case. Engagement of the government is critical. I know some others may have a view that it's difficult to engage the government doesn't care, but if you don't do that, I think it will be very difficult for you to try to promote sustainable palm oil in China. And the strategy really has to go beyond outreach and awareness. Of course, the first thing we have to do is create an awareness. But if you're going to achieve this 40% by 2019, then you have to do a lot more planning, action plan with real targets and who is going to do it. By giving awareness and so on, you're not going to go very far. And what are the key messages you're going to give the Chinese markets and consumers? And also, we have to build on the existing initiatives and experience in China. On sustainability, don't assume that we are coming on a high horse to tell China what to do. They already have a lot of experience in many areas in sustainability. How do you make that relevant for palm oil? And also, we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach as within the theme of this RT, partnerships, and what role can RSPO play in this whole thing? Now, what key messages can you give to the Chinese consumers? You can see that negative messaging has worked very well on the Western consumers, as seen in these few slides here. The latest one being the Greenpeace campaign against some big companies. But will this work in China? For a start, although China is the second biggest importer of palm oil doesn't appear in the products. So the consumers are unaware of the presence of palm oil. And even if they do, and you tell them those issues, does it really make sense to them? Because the issue about orangutan is so remote from them. But if you can somehow relate it to the iconic species and say, look, somehow it may eventually come back in a boomerang to affect your panda, you may have a chance that they will listen to you. And the other thing is, how about positive messaging to China? For 30 years now, China has a one-child policy. If you can assure the consumer that what you're going to do with palm oil could assure the future of that one child, I think you're making some headways. Health and food safety is a national concern and national priority. And this is as seen in the example of the 2008 crisis on the milk crisis, whereby I think about 35,000 children were affected by this scandal. And coming to edible oils, China is more concerned about getting over this problem of gutter oil rather than CSPO. So I think that if RSPO or those who are engaging China, to the consumers, if you give them the assurance that the future of that one child is well assured rather than this one, then I think you are also making a little bit of headway. And also the WWF bias scorecard. It has worked very well in Europe because here you are focused on RSPO members, high impact on brands, and you have identified leaders and laggards. But will it work in China, in the Chinese market? The problem you have is you only have 3 RSPO members. The only 5 member you had initially, and this is relevant to Chinese brands. And is it consistent with the Chinese practices that you have now in terms of face, giving face, in terms of relationships, and so on? And okay, if we look at consumer brands in China, the high-profile brands are still the MNCs. For instance, McDonald's has just become an RSPO member, and they are everywhere in the major cities in China. China consumer brands, which are the main ones? Okay, you've got Wilmar, with this range of the Arowana brand, is found everywhere in the supermarkets. The other major brand is Costco's Fortune brand. But if you look at the website and try to look for the ingredients, the question is, do they contain palm oil? They have peanut oil, soybean oil, and everything else, but there's no specific mention of palm oil. So if you get a target on them, you got the right target. The only one have got actually declared that have got palm oil is actually Chulong Group, which is, has operations in Indonesia, and they said they are producing palm oil. Now, also to build on existing initiatives, don't assume that China doesn't know what to do. If you look at certification, if it's a good business case, if you're convinced that the RSPO certification is good, then they will take it on. And this is the example I showed the slide here, is that China is the world's largest, has the world's largest number of ISO 9000 and 14,000 certifications. And also, if you look at some of the initiatives that have been taken to date, WWF China's effort in promoting markets in 2005, and then the CFNA involvement. The latest one, of course, is the CNY DEFRA report, which is actually trying to develop some policies for the government. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go very fast. Now, to engage China, you really have to look who are the players, connecting the dots, which is government, industry associations, and intergovernment. Now, I put in here, for instance, in edible oil, at the highest level in government is the State Council, but there's some entry points for RSPO itself, or those engaging. There's one is the council, which is the China Council for International Cooperation of Environment and Development. Here, this particular body advises the State Council, is chaired by the Vice Chairman. And you also have the NDRC, which is the overarching body looking at investments and development, and the Ministry of Commerce. Now, if you look at the linkage, your strongest linkage is actually through CFNA, the association, because it is an association that is strongly linked to the Ministry of Commerce. And the main players in the palm oil industry are members of CFNA. So if you can engage them, they'll be right. The other avenue is, of course, through the China Network of Sustainable Development of Sustainable Palm Oil, which was started by CFNA and WWF China, and it has on board some MNCs, palm oil companies from producing countries, as well as RSPO recently then. So what is the role of RSPO in this whole game? Now, in conclusion, I'll run to a few points here. I would say that, number one is, from what you can see, that supply chain has to collectively play a role on CSPO in China, and not just depending on RSPO and so on. It's a collective effort. And you need to have a clear strategy to engage China that goes beyond awareness and outreach. You must have a clear plan, you must have a clear strategy on how to achieve that 40% that you are looking for. And two levels of awareness. And two levels of awareness is that one is on palm oil. There's a very low level of awareness on palm oil itself. So, you have to convince them that palm oil is good for them, and then, of course, CSPO will follow. Clear business case, I've said. The role of the government is critical for providing the enabling environment, and MNCs in China will really have to provide the leadership. You have a high presence, people know of your commitment to 2015, but is it happening in China? And lastly, RSPO have to really make a presence in China. For instance, maybe have an RSPO liaison office in China. Thank you very much.